What if the most powerful handshake you ever received came from a wild animal? In a quiet mountain town, a rescued bobcat named Ranger doesn't roar or growl. He reaches out, gently placing his paw in the hands of strangers, one by one. Children who've never spoken, veterans who've lost everything, visitors with silent wounds they didn't know could heal. This isn't a trick, it's a choice. A bond beyond species, beyond words. Stay with us as we unfold the unforgettable story of the paw that touched hearts and the town that learned to listen. Don't skip this. You'll never see a bobcat the same way again. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. If you enjoy the story, please like and follow. It helps us keep creating more. Your feedback means everything. Thank you. The snow was still clinging to the rooftops of Cedar Hollow that late March morning when Helen Whitlock stood in her kitchen holding a chipped mug of coffee, watching the first thin rays of sun melt ice off the store's front steps. It was a quiet town, the kind where most people knew your dog's name, where winters were long and stories longer. But nothing in all her years had prepared her for the moment Gordon came crashing through the back door, soaked from boots to collar, holding something bundled tightly in his flannel coat. "Helen," he gasped, "I need your help. Now." She stepped closer, heart pounding. His face was pale and wild with urgency. As he slowly peeled the soaked flannel away, two golden eyes met hers. Not scared, not feral, just watching. Inside the blanket lay a small, sodden creature, maybe 12 or 13 weeks old, with tufted ears, oversized paws, and a front leg twisted unnaturally beneath it. "A bobcat?" she whispered. "Found him by that frozen stream past Devil's Hollow," Gordon said, brushing wet leaves off the matted fur. "Trap got his paw. No mother in sight. I couldn't just leave him." Helen stared at the animal. He was breathing shallowly, his sides heaving, but there was something in his gaze that pierced through her doubt. A quiet steadiness. Trust, maybe, or the beginnings of it. They wrapped him in towels and rushed him to the vet clinic on the edge of town. Dr. Lynn Tran, their longtime vet, took one look and went straight to work. After a tense hour in the waiting room, she came out with that practiced calm veterinarians learn early in their careers. "He'll live," she said, "but the paw is damaged permanently. He won't be able to hunt, and he's too young. He's already imprinted on people. Releasing him would be cruel." Helen looked at Gordon. He looked back, hopeful. "We could keep him, just until he's strong." They both knew "just until" never really meant what it said. Over the next few weeks, the bobcat, now named Ranger, slowly found his rhythm upstairs, above the store. Gordon built a soft bed near the window. Helen measured out meals and kept his meds on a sticky note stuck to the fridge. And Ranger, still limping but growing stronger, never once tried to escape. To Helen's surprise, she found herself drawn to him, not because he was exotic or wild, but because he was so quietly present. He never meowed like a house cat. He watched, listened, breathed beside her when she sat by the fire in the evenings. Then, one morning, a month later, as Helen unlocked the register downstairs, she heard the soft thump of paws on the old wooden steps. Ranger had never come down on his own before. She turned. He was standing at the top of the staircase, head slightly tilted. His coat had filled out, golden brown with flecks of black, a white patch on his chest like a permanent tuxedo. "Come on, then," she said softly. Ranger descended, slow but steady. When he reached the bottom, he didn't bolt or crouch. He simply walked behind the counter, leapt onto the small bench Gordon had built, and sat, still, watching, guarding. Minutes later, the first customer of the day walked in. Old Henry Tulls, coming for nails and a handshake. But what he found was a bobcat sitting behind the register like it was the most natural thing in the world. Helen smiled. "Looks like we've got a new staff member." And so began the legend of the bobcat behind the counter, a creature not born for the world of shelves and receipts, but who, by some miracle, had chosen to stay. At first, people thought it was a joke. Is that real? Is he trained? Are you insane? These were the usual questions thrown at Helen and Gordon as word spread through Cedar Hollow. There was a bobcat working the counter at Whitlock's general store. But Ranger wasn't working, not in any traditional sense. He was simply there. Every morning, descending the stairs from the apartment above like clockwork. He'd stretch, yawn, and leap onto his fleece-covered bench behind the counter, claiming his post with quiet authority. Customers didn't know what to do at first. The regulars were more amused than anything. Tourists passing through slowed their pace, eyes wide as they spotted the muscular feline lounging like a manager on break. Gordon had nailed a small wooden sign to the bench. "Meet Ranger, he doesn't bite, unless you do first." By early summer, Ranger had become part of the store's rhythm. Some folks dropped by just to see him, even if they didn't need screws or kindling. But despite his calm nature, there was something else about Ranger that began to stir whispers. It started with Mrs. Lily Brown. 85 years old, widowed for nearly a decade, Lily walked with a cane and a stubborn dignity. She came every Wednesday morning at 8 a.m. sharp to buy birdseed and always paused by Ranger's bench to say hello. One Wednesday, Helen watched as Lily leaned over the counter, her hands trembling slightly as she reached into her coat pocket. "Got you something today," she said, pulling out a piece of freeze-dried chicken. Ranger, who'd been lazily flicking his tail, rose slowly to his feet. He stretched, long, graceful, and padded forward. And then, gently, deliberately, he lifted his right paw and laid it atop Lily's hand. The store went silent. Helen froze. Lily gasped, but she didn't flinch. Her weathered face softened, and her eyes filled with tears. "Well, aren't you just the gentleman?" she whispered. From that moment on, Ranger's paw became his way of speaking. But it wasn't for everyone. Children under 12 were given sniffs and gentle stares, but no paw. Loud talkers, ignored. Those who rushed forward, backed away from. Ranger wasn't a circus act. He was discerning. It was as if he had a sixth sense for sincerity. "He knows who's ready," Gordon said one afternoon, watching Ranger place his paw on a quiet young man who had recently lost his dog. The ritual grew, quietly at first. A few people began offering treats, not for tricks, but as gestures of friendship. And if Ranger accepted, he responded not with a purr or a meow, but with that simple, stunning movement, paw to hand. One afternoon, Dr. Lynn Tran stopped by, ostensibly for batteries, but really to see the phenomenon for herself. "Is it true," she asked Helen, "he's choosing who to touch?" "See for yourself," Helen replied, handing her a salmon cube. Lynn approached carefully. Ranger stood. Their eyes met. Slowly, he reached forward and placed his paw on her outstretched hand. Lynn let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "This isn't conditioning," she said. "This is emotional intelligence." Helen smiled. "That's what we think too." That evening, as the last light faded behind the hills and Helen was sweeping the floor, the bell above the door jingled. A little girl had entered, maybe 6 or 7. She had dark hair in uneven pigtails and wore a red puffer jacket despite the warm weather. She didn't speak, just stared at Ranger. Helen opened her mouth to say something, but the child walked forward and stopped by the counter. Ranger, who had been napping, lifted his head. He blinked, watched. Then, without any cue, without a word spoken, he stood, walked to the edge of the bench, and sat upright. The girl's fingers curled around the edge of the wood. She leaned in, and Ranger watched her like he was waiting. Helen's breath caught. Something was beginning, something bigger than curiosity or coincidence. And though she couldn't name it yet, she knew this would be the next chapter. The little girl didn't speak. She stood by the counter, hands gripping the worn wood, eyes locked on Ranger. He stared back, unblinking, his golden gaze neither predatory nor passive, just curious. A quiet hum settled over the store, as if even the wind outside had paused to watch. Helen approached carefully. "Hi there, sweetheart. Is your mom or dad with you?" From behind a display of gardening gloves, a woman stepped forward. Mid-30s, brown hair pulled into a hasty bun, eyes exhausted but kind. "I'm sorry," she said, voice low. "This is Clara. She's not much of a talker. We saw the story in the Provincial Times. She begged me to come." Helen nodded, heart already softening. "She's welcome here." Clara didn't move. She kept staring at Ranger, who remained completely still. "Can she—" The mother hesitated. "Would it be okay if she tried?" Helen looked at Ranger. His ears were forward, body relaxed, not a trace of anxiety or retreat. "Let's let him decide." The girl slowly raised a hand, hesitating halfway, fingers trembling. And then, just as slowly, Ranger rose. He padded to the edge of the counter. For a heartbeat, they studied each other in perfect silence. Then he lifted his paw. Clara didn't flinch. She leaned forward, eyes wide, and gently placed her hand beneath his. Fur brushed skin. The contact was feather-light, yet somehow thunderous in its impact. Clara's shoulders, once tight and defensive, relaxed. Her jaw quivered, and then she whispered, barely audible, "Hi." Her mother gasped, tears already streaming down her cheeks. "She hasn't spoken in months," she choked out. "Not a word, not a single one." Helen stood frozen, the broom still in her hand. Ranger, as if understanding the weight of the moment, didn't move. He kept his paw gently resting on Clara's hand, eyes never leaving hers. And in that stillness, something shifted. Not just in Clara, but in the store itself. The old hardwood floors, the faded shelves, even the dust in the air, everything seemed to hush in reverence. After several minutes, Clara stepped back. Her hand dropped slowly to her side. Ranger did the same. She turned and walked to her mother, who crouched to embrace her. "We'll come back tomorrow?" Clara asked. Her mother could barely nod. The next day, Clara returned. Red jacket, same stillness. This time, Ranger met her at the bench before she reached the counter. No hesitation. Just paw to hand, like old friends resuming a conversation. Helen began keeping a notebook beneath the register. She didn't know why. Maybe to remember the names, or the moments. June 12th. Clara. First words. "Hi." Within a week, word spread again. Not through newspapers or videos, but whispers. Parents talked. Teachers called. Even the local clinic sent inquiries. "What is he doing? Gordon asked one evening as Ranger lay purring at Helen's feet. "He's not doing anything," she replied. "He's just being." But being was enough. Dr. Lin Tran returned to observe, not as a vet this time, but as a student. "This isn't behavioral," she noted, watching Ranger interact with Clara. "This is emotional responsiveness, selective empathy. It's not trained, it's chosen." The town began to change. People came not to see a tame bobcat, but to feel something. A connection, a gentleness, a recognition. And Ranger gave it, always on his terms, always in silence, but never without meaning. By midsummer, the quiet miracle that was Ranger had become anything but quiet. What began as a whisper through town had grown into a roar. News of the bobcat who touched hearts, quite literally, had made its way beyond Cedar Hollow. A local journalist had written a blog post. That post was picked up by a national human interest column. Then came the call from West Coast mornings, followed by a short segment on CBC. And with that, everything changed. Cars began appearing with plates from Washington, Alberta, even as far as Illinois. People lined up outside Whitlock's general store before it opened, phones in hand, eyes eager. Some came in awe. Others came to record a moment. The town's tiny motel filled up for the first time in years. Even the coffee shop across the street hired 2 extra baristas. It should have been a good thing, but it wasn't. Ranger, so composed in his quiet world, began to shift. The lines made him anxious. The flashes unsettled him. Loud voices, clapping, parents pushing their children forward. It all began to wear him down. Helen noticed it first. He would retreat behind the counter sooner, stay curled up on his fleece longer. His tail flicked more often. The easy stillness in his body grew tense. Then, one afternoon, a group of teenagers burst through the front door, laughing loudly, one of them filming with his phone already recording. "Where's the cat?" one of them shouted. Ranger bolted. A blur of muscle and instinct, he disappeared up the stairs before anyone could stop him. The room went silent. Helen's heart sank. "That's enough," Gordon said that evening as they sat on the porch, Ranger pressed against Helen's legs. "We're not a zoo," she replied, stroking the fur behind Ranger's ears. "And he's not a spectacle." They called Dr. Lin Tran, who arrived the next morning with pamphlets, signage, and a plan. "He's trying," she said. "But he's overstimulated. This can't go on." And so, they changed the rules. A large wooden sign was placed outside. Ranger's greeting hours, 10 o'clock to 11 a.m. and 3 o'clock 4 p.m. No flash photography, no crowds, no loud voices. Visitors were asked to sign up for short appointments. 10 minutes. One family at a time. No touching unless Ranger offered. No filming unless permitted. Some grumbled, a few left, but most stayed. And something surprising happened. The lineups got shorter, but quieter. People slowed down. They sat on the old bench by the maple tree, sipped coffee, watched the hills. They talked to each other, listened. And Ranger returned. Not all at once, but gradually, cautiously. The flick of his tail steadied. He sat behind the counter again, lifted his paw again, trusted again. Helen and Gordon even added a small guest book, each page filled with words like, "He looked at me like I mattered. I haven't felt this calm in months. He reminded me of someone I lost." Then came a name Helen would never forget. Emma Rodriguez, age 7, Denver, Colorado. She arrived one Tuesday afternoon during a lull between scheduled appointments. Her grandmother, Rosa, stood at the door holding a clipboard with their confirmation. Emma didn't speak. She didn't look around. She simply walked to the counter and waited. Ranger was napping. Until he wasn't. He rose, stretched, and instead of waiting to be approached, he approached her. Slowly, deliberately. He leapt down from the bench, walked to the edge of the counter, and extended his paw. Emma raised hers. Their hands met. Rosa gasped. "Oh my God!" Helen watched in disbelief. There was a softness in Emma's face. Her fingers, usually clenched, were relaxed. Her chin lifted. Her eyes locked with Ranger's. Then came the whisper, "Thank you, Ranger." Rosa burst into tears. Helen did too. That night, after they closed, Ranger curled up beside the register and purred, a rare sound reserved only for peace. And in the silence of the darkened shop, Helen whispered, "He's not just bridging hearts anymore, Gordon. He's healing them." Autumn came slowly to Cedar Hollow. The hills burned gold and rust. The mornings turned crisp, and the air carried the scent of wood smoke and pine. Tourists had thinned. School had resumed. Life, after the whirlwind of summer, began to breathe in its natural rhythm again. And so did Ranger. By now, he was more than the store's silent greeter. He was its rhythm, its pulse. Customers walked in softer. Children whispered instead of shouted. Even the bell above the door seemed to chime more gently. Helen had watched the transformation not just in others, but in herself. She had always been practical, level-headed, a woman of lists and routines. But these days, she found herself pausing more, listening more, feeling more. And it all came back to one paw. Dr. Lin Tran visited regularly to check on Ranger's health. At nearly 5 years old, he was healthy, strong, alert, but slowing just slightly. His limp was a little more noticeable on cold mornings. He napped longer, and Helen had begun to feel the quiet weight of time pressing in. "He's aging gracefully," Lin said during a routine checkup. "But you should prepare. Captive bobcats can live up to 15 years, sometimes more. But Ranger, he's lived deeply. That counts too." Helen nodded, her heart aching even as she smiled. Emma Rodriguez and her grandmother became regulars. Every month, they made the journey from Denver, and each time, Ranger greeted Emma like an old friend. The words she had once struggled to form now flowed freely in short, meaningful sentences. "He listens better than most people," she told Helen once, her hand resting on Ranger's head. "And he doesn't interrupt." The guest book grew thick with stories. One page from a widower read, "I haven't touched another soul since my wife passed, until Ranger." Another, "My son stopped shaking after touching his paw. Just stopped. It was like magic." Then came the letter. A woman from Nova Scotia had written to say she'd watched the CBC segment online and cried for an hour. Her teenage daughter, battling anxiety and sensory issues, had begun practicing Ranger moments at home, sitting quietly, eyes soft, one hand extended. "It calms her," the mother wrote. "She says she imagines his paw reaching back." Helen folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer under the register. She didn't need the news crews or the Facebook followers to know the truth. Ranger had become more than a local legend. He was a legacy. On a quiet October evening, Helen sat alone in the store, the lights dimmed, the cash drawer balanced. Ranger lay curled up beside her feet, chest rising and falling in the slow rhythm of deep rest. Outside, the wind rustled through the amber leaves. Gordon came in from the porch, holding 2 mugs of tea. He handed her one and sat beside her, their knees touching. "You think he knows?" Gordon asked. "That he's changed the world?" She smiled softly. "I think he knows he's loved. That might be enough." As if on cue, Ranger stretched and placed one paw gently over Helen's foot. She looked down, and her breath caught, not from surprise, but from gratitude. From the realization that no matter how long he stayed, or how quietly he one day left, Ranger had already given more than most creatures ever could. The next morning, the sun rose over Cedar Hollow as it always did, slow, golden, reverent. At 9:59, Ranger took his place on the bench. At 10 a.m. sharp, the bell chimed, and a young boy entered, eyes wide, hands folded behind his back. Helen nodded toward Ranger. "He's waiting." The boy stepped forward, hesitant. He stopped at the edge of the counter, unsure. Ranger blinked once, rose slowly, and extended his paw. Another page turned. Another soul touched. One gentle moment at a time.